Hi, this is Professor Waltuck, and since we had a snow day last week and we didn't really get to talk about Chapter 5, I wanted to experiment a little bit with some technology and see if I could produce a video and present this material to you. So as you see, this chapter is about advertising management, and there's a number of key objectives that you'll see in the text and that we're going to talk about in these next few minutes about this whole issue and why it's important to understand how advertising works and why it's important in the whole process of managing an ad and integrated marketing communication campaign and program, and how that the money that we decide to spend, we've talked about the Super Bowl ads that cost millions of dollars just to show, let alone the millions that they may cost to produce, and the relationship of that money that we spend on advertising to our understanding of the effectiveness of the ads in terms of how they translate to things like sales and other things like brand awareness and customer loyalty. And the issue of whether we should be working with people who already work within our organization, who may be capable of doing marketing and creating the advertising for us, as opposed to working with some outside agency, and how we're going to make that kind of decision and make that choice. And if we're looking at ad agencies, we want to understand the different job functions. Who are the people that are working on our campaign if we do go ahead and hire somebody to do that, and how those different functions relate to us and our company and our product and services that we're trying to market and advertise and communicate. And are there different things that so-called creative briefs, the summary report, if you will, should have in them to tell the client about how we will be acting to facilitate the effectiveness of the advertising that we're going to pay for and create. And a little bit about the so-called global arena, some international implications about these kinds of things. And this particular graphic we've seen before. This is just another one, a repeat of this one. It starts at the lower right in the base of the pyramid here, about understanding the planning process for the IMC, the Integrated Marketing Communications Plan. And it works all the way up to the very top on the top right about evaluation. And these are also in order of the chapters in which they're presented in the text to you. We've talked a little bit about that. So an overview, again, not just about the learning objectives, but what we're going to really get into here. We're going to think and talk and learn about advertising management and theories of advertising, how advertising works. And that gets a little bit into some aspects of brain function and memory function and human preferences and how decisions get formed and made and beliefs and so on. And the relationship, again, as we said a few minutes ago, about the cost, the advertising expenditures, and how that then relates to our success in our campaign. And we'll talk a little bit about choosing advertising agencies and this so-called creative brief, a document that, kind of like legal briefs, is a bit of a report summary on the issues, the key issues of this campaign. So one of the first things we want to understand is the so-called hierarchy of effects model, and you'll see this is the first of several slides on this. There's kind of a sequence about the way that advertising and marketing communication impact people, the effect that this has on folks. And as we see, the first thing is to make someone aware that our message and our ad and our images and our language and all of the stuff that we do, whether it's taglines, slogans, imagery, graphics, logos, all of it, creates that awareness on the part of the consumer or the potential consumer. We want that advertising to impart knowledge. We want people to know and to understand what it is that our product or service will do for them. And of course, we want people to begin to like what it is that we're trying to sell them. And from that liking and knowledge and awareness, the next step is, well, if you have a choice, we want you to prefer ours. We want you to choose Colgate over Crest or Crest over Colgate, or Kraft macaroni and cheese over Annie's Natural with the little bunny macaronis, or whatever it is that we're trying to sell. Conviction, that's a sense of belief. We hold this strongly or more strongly in terms of how we feel about that brand and about that product. And of course, from all of these things, the awareness, the knowledge, the liking and preference and conviction, ultimately we hope that the consumer will purchase our product. So these tend to be sequential steps. Some experts do question if things happen exactly in this order. And the key thing is that a consumer is almost certainly going to spend some time in each of the steps of that, in developing awareness and preference and liking and ultimately, hopefully, purchase. And certainly a customer's loyalty to the brand involves all of those steps in the sequence. In the same ways that we form our attitudes, as we talked about previously, these different common patterns, the so-called cognitive, affective, and conative. Cognitive, what is it that I know? Affective, how do I feel, my emotional response to the advertising and to the message? And then conative, the action that I actually take, what it is that I do based on my knowledge. As it says, awareness and knowledge, my liking, preferences, conviction, and then conative, the action, the actual purchase of the product. When we begin to talk about the personal values that people hold, the things that make something important or useful or valuable to us, there's a whole range of things that go to both needs and wants, preferences, things that we believe will be useful or fun or make us happy or give us some kind of sense of personal accomplishment and social status, all of these things that come into play in terms of what matters to us. And one of the other theories, and again this is a little bit about the psychology of consumer behavior, there's the so-called means end or means to an end theory. The means, the message, that is the way, the path to accomplish something, leading to, in this case, the end state, that satisfaction that we hopefully get when we make that decision and take that action to get the product or the service. And the slightly longer chain here, the so-called MECHA, or means end conceptualization of components of advertising strategy. It's a real mouthful. But what it really means is people are going to learn the attributes, the things that there are about this product or this service, hopefully the benefit to them, whether it fulfills a need or a want or a desire, and then how that relates to the personal values of that consumer and that customer. It's the same way whether we're choosing, again, a car, a house, where we're going to go to school, the toothpaste that we use, or where to get that next cup of coffee. So the same issues that apply to the end user consumer, the customer that we tend to think about, also applies in business to business. There is a means to an end chain. And we see some examples here where there are certain attributes in the example that's given in the text of Greenfield Online. Internet speed, expertise, experience, attributes, things that this particular vendor makes available and tries to communicate to its potential and existing customers. And here's the things about us, here's what it does for you, those are the benefits. And if you believe in that, if you utilize their products and services, it will satisfy or fulfill, that being the end state, the desired end state here, both for the business that wants to sell it to you and for you, the business that wants to get it. Those personal values, you'll be fulfilled. You'll see social acceptance for how smart you were in making that choice. And if you made a wise choice for your company, hopefully that leads to a little bit of job security as well. So in advertising, no surprise, there are verbal and visual elements. And we begin to think about, again, the science and the psychology of how we humans communicate and how the impact of these things are on us and then on our perception of the brand, of the product and service. And we seek in our advertising campaigns a balance between the visual and the verbal. When we process with our eyes the visual, it's easier to recall. We remember, we humans, typically, that which we have seen more than that which we have heard or read. It's easier to recall. And if we're looking at something that has text, a print ad or even a commercial with text on the screen, our brains are going to store this, both in terms of the pictures and the words. And so we're getting, as it says on the slide you see here, both the concrete, the very specific, and the abstract, the more suggested or symbolic meaning or idea. And when we look at things, or rather listen to things on the radio, The words we use, the music we may use, will still have the capacity to create in the mind of the consumer, the customer, that visual imagery. Now there's a term that you'll see in the text, visual Esperanto. You may not be familiar with Esperanto. There was an attempt, I think this goes back to the 1950s, to create a language that could be learned and used internationally in every country and nation around the world, so that all people could, in theory at least, learn to speak the same language. And that language is called Esperanto. I know many, many years ago there was actually a record label company, a music company, ESP Records, and it stood for Esperanto. They had a very diverse and global kind of product line. So when we have these things, this also relates then to how we market and advertise across cultures and across nations with our international ads, and again, business to business as well as business to end consumer. So there's a number of factors that impact the way that there are promotions, the things we do, between how we promote a product or service and the actual sale or purchase of it. And so when we set out to promote something, whether it's by samples or products or demonstrations or incentives, coupons, all these different ways that stuff gets promoted, there's the goal of the promotion. And what's called the threshold effect is when we've got that customer just about at the point of making the purchase. We've got them convinced, those factors that we saw earlier that bring the customer the awareness, the understanding of the attributes and the benefits, and they're ready to make that decision. They are on that threshold. They're right on that next step away from, clicking the click or putting down the money to make that buy. But at the same time, with anything over the lifespan and life cycle of the advertising and marketing campaign, there comes a point when the money that we may spend to advertise and to market and to communicate no longer results in sustained or increasing sales and revenues, but rather it gets to a point where we have diminishing returns. And for the marketing managers and the advertising managers, that's the point at which we need to take a look and say, do we need to change the message? Do we need to rethink the image, the brand, the attributes, the product, rethink and examine again what the state of the market is for competition right now? Where are we at? And do we keep on doing what we do, even if we know that we're not going to get back what we got back before or what we would like to get back? Sometimes there's the other thing, which is carryover effects. We can invest in this now, and it carries forward. The message, the idea that we plant into the mind of the consumer can carry forward so that we continue to advertise things like cars that people don't buy all the time. And yet we want very much to create that message in the mind of the consumer so that when the day comes that you're going to trade in your car, you're going to go out for your next car, you will think of, remember, associate what you want with the brand that you have seen the ads for, whatever that may be. And so that's something that advertising and marketing folks think about, and part of the planning, how you'll spend your money, where and when you'll put those ads out there into the world. You want that to carry forward. You want to create that long-standing awareness and recognition. And sometimes the customer just gets worn out. They get burned out on your message. We've seen that happen to restaurant chains, something that may have been in vogue or in fashion at a certain point in time. It could be restaurants, it could be cars, it could be clothing and fashion. All kinds of things come and go. And so sometimes there are social and cultural and technological changes to where our advertising message simply wears out. It's no longer something that's welcome in the mind of the consumer. And as we see, sometimes over time, these things will decay, diminish, and other kinds of things can happen. New technology, stuff can happen that will disrupt the marketplace and disrupt the mind of the consumer as well. And here we see just a simple little graph about the so-called decay effects model. We advertise up to a certain point. Of course, we're looking for sales, and we hit that peak. And if we pull the plug on advertising because we think we've really hit it and we're now in the point of diminishing returns, over time, certainly if we're not going to continue to implant that message and reinforce that message about our product and service in the mind of the consumer, you will see some decay and decline in sales. No surprise there, pretty obvious stuff. So comparing now, thinking a little bit about working with folks that are inside the organization compared to those who are outside the organization. As we see, there are differences typically in costs. If we're working with our own people, the cost may be a little lower, but at the same time, we may find greater talent, greater creative expertise, as well as a unique and different perspective that isn't one that feels it has to go along to get along the way the insiders do. The insider is going to be a little less likely to challenge or argue with the marketing bosses. And you also have the opportunity to access, again, those top creative talents. But if you're working with people inside, you may have closer and better relationships with top executives. You may have more stability of the team. And it may be possible to turn those ads out a little bit more quickly. Not necessarily. So what kind of things do so-called full-service agencies do for us? Well, they're going to be able to give us great advice and marketing research expertise and knowledge about how to find and develop those target markets. Who are the customers, the ideal customers? We talked before in earlier chapters about market segments and niches and demographics and these different ways to understand who should be and would be the principal customers for what we're marketing and selling. And the full service agency can give us, again, that specialized service and help us select the important aspects of advertising, create our logos and our taglines or slogans. They will plan the advertising, they will plan and do the purchasing of the media space and time, whether it's print ads, broadcast ads, radio, television, or other. Today they're going to be in all these multi-channels. So if we're working with, again, external advertising agencies, there are so-called boutique ones, smaller shops that may specialize in particular kinds of products, services, and industries. There are full-service ones that will do it all. So we see advertising agencies, companies that are specialists in direct marketing, selling directly from you, the producer, directly to the consumer, whether it's e-commerce or other kinds of direct marketing. You see all these things, whether it's on QVC or infomercials. Marketing directly to the consumer through advertising is just another aspect of the services that these kinds of agencies can produce for us. And there are specialists in trade promotions and so on. Online and digital is yet another specialty. I think I've mentioned before, I've got a couple of nephews, family members, who work very, very high-level jobs, particularly in online and digital advertising and marketing. Social media, public relations a little bit different, about the management of the reputation of, the public image of an executive, a company, a brand, and all of that. So with all of this, as we've talked before, well, there's the money. Somebody's got to say that, yes, it's okay if you go ahead and spend that $5 million that you and your fellow students on your team creating an IMC are going to get. And the size of the account, as it says, typically matches up to the size of the agency. And if you're doing certain kinds of expenditures and dividing up your money and your resources for your marketing campaign in certain ways, typically, as you see here, 75, 15, and 10, 75% of what you're going to spend is to buy media space, to actually buy the rights to put it in print and broadcast and wherever else you're going to place those ads. 15% is the creative work, the people who are going to do the drawings and the designs and the ideas. If you're going to create commercials, as your teams are going to do, what should those look like? What kind of story do we want to tell? And how should we tell that story? That's a creative process. It may be not as simple and not as direct as this is what we make, this is how great it is, this is why you should buy it, this is the value. We see commercials every day and ads every day that speak a little more indirectly, a little more symbolically perhaps, or in different ways to try and appeal to us about what it is that they do and how and why we should get their product. whether it's the Bud Light ads in the Super Bowl that we talked about, that now the campaign is to directly criticize other brands, even in this medieval night setting about the use or non-use of corn syrup to make their beer. There's different ways that these things will be done creatively. And then finally, the 10% is to actually generate and produce the advertising itself. Crowdsourcing, a term you may be familiar with. It is possible to go online today and to say, we have an idea, and will you help us to create advertising and marketing? And we see that some very large companies, this is not like crowdfunding, where you're looking for a Kickstarter campaign or a GoFundMe. But here, we are literally outsourcing the creation of advertising and communication for marketing purposes. And both Doritos have done this. They have, with a number of their products, annual sorts of solicitations of ideas for unique and special limited time flavors. Chicken and waffle potato chips for the Lay's brand, for example, and different things that they've done over time. Harley-Davidson is another company that has relied heavily on its extremely loyal and large customer base, as they tell us in the text, to crowdsource this kind of marketing and advertising. And of course, the two great advantages of this, you're involving your consumers. They become part of the story of that advertising and marketing communication program. So the consumer is now part of the story. They're not simply the person who puts down their money or clicks the button to make the buy. They're a person who is now contributing, hey, tell it this way, do it this way. This is what makes it great. And tell me about X and do it this way. And of course, when you do that, you're generating a lot of buzz, a lot of attention. And by word of mouth, that message spreads even farther. And of course, you get a broader impact and a lot more bang for your buck, hopefully. Well, if we're going to select an advertising agency, several things we want to do inside of our company before we plunk down all of those dollars to do the creative work, to do the ad buying, and to consult with these people. We want to know what our goals are. What is it we're trying to achieve if we're going to be advertising and marketing and communicating our particular product or service? Whether it's a car, whether it's toothpaste, whether it's cereal, whether it's left-handed wing nuts, whatever it is, we want to have and know what our goals are. This is what we want to achieve. 5% increase in sales year over year, 10% more customer brand loyalty, repeat purchases over time, whatever the case may be. So what will then be the process, the criteria by which we will evaluate and look at these different ad agencies? How will we be able to discern and determine which is the right one for us? We're going to put out some kind of a call, usually called a request for proposals or RFP, and different companies will submit, different agencies will submit their proposals for how they will handle our particular account, how they will handle our campaign for us in that way. And from that, we want to be able to evaluate, screen the initial list of applicants, get it down to the top 2 or 3, and then request from them to sit with them and hear their creative pitch, just as each of you will be participating with your fellow students in a group to produce and deliver your own creative pitches for the products and services you're going to create. So again, that first step, goal setting. You want to know that before you contact anybody. It helps to reduce bias. You're going to be a little less open to outside influences or to things you already think or think you know if you have a clear goal in mind and it's shared among your own team of decision makers and evaluators. It shapes your direction and which way you're going to go with your campaign. So the things that might be the evaluation criteria, what would be the important things to help you choose and select an ad agency? We see this on the slide. Is it a huge agency? Do they have the resources? Do they have a lot of experience? Are there any problems with conflicts of interest? If we sell left-handed wing nuts and they are marketing campaign managers and an ad campaign agency for the makers of the right-handed wing nuts, that may be a problem for us. We may have a little conflict of interest going on and we may not consider them because of that. What is their reputation? What do others that they have worked with have to say about them, and how capable they were, and how competent and how professional and how effective and efficient they were? Do they have the staff, the technology, the means to produce that which we want and which they say they can and will do for us? Do they have the people on staff who know how to make the buy, to purchase the media, the access to TV and radio, newspaper, print, magazines, and everywhere else today, internet, multi-channel, that we want to have? And what else do they do? And then finally, really important, what's that personal relationship? Are we going to feel good about working with these people? Do we trust them? And do we feel really good about being with them and being at the table with them to talk about all of these really important inside things about our product, our service, and our organization? When it gets down to it and we've got these 2 or 3 companies that we're going to consider, we want them to make the pitch. That's a formal presentation. I don't know about the word shootout. I don't know if I would use that word exactly, but it is a competition. And from these several final pitches, you will make a decision. They're going to try to talk to you about the specific situations that you have put to them. And it does take time and money for the agencies to put these pitches together. So you know that they should be doing it with their interest at stake, and their motivation should be strong to deliver that kind of a strong message to you in that way when they make the pitch. So we talked about some of the key people, the different roles that are down inside of that advertising organization. We'll talk a little bit more about these in a few minutes, but you see that there are a variety of different things, from the client marketing managers, account planners, the people who do the buy, creative people, and so on, and how these people tend to interrelate and interact, and who really is in charge of and manages each of these particular types of functions. We'll come back a little more on that. So the advertising campaign, this is really what we're all about creating. It's what you're going to create. We know that there's advertising goals, what we're trying to achieve here. We want to understand what kinds of media we want to select, whether it's a combination of traditional print, whether it's in newspapers or magazines or elsewhere. Are we going to be putting stuff online on the web? Are we going to be using it in social media and placing ads on Facebook and LinkedIn or Instagram or wherever else our customers tend to go? What will be the slogan or the tagline? Nike says, just do it, and that's been a hugely successful tagline for them. People know it. Are we going to be consistent? Will our various ads and campaigns and messages and communications be consistent in the message, the meaning that they deliver, about the attributes, about the benefits, about the value, so that we can then convince that customer to both keep us in mind and to make the purchase, to cross that threshold and get to the point of closing the sale? Where do we want to position ourselves? That's really relational. How do we want to look compared to the competition? How is that going to be structured in our ads? So we talked again about those Bud Light ads that are now explicit in comparing their product by name to other competitors, to Miller Lite and to Coors Light in particular, saying, hey, those folks are using corn syrup, we don't. Arguably one is better than the other, and maybe it is and maybe it isn't, but they made a choice to position their product compared to the competition in that very specific way. And then finally, campaign duration. How long will we be at this? How long will we run these ads and run these commercials and put that message out there? And how ultimately will we assess what happened? So the goals, what is it we are after here? Well, pretty obvious, and I think we've kind of hit on these already. Make people aware of us. We want you to have that recognition when you see our ad or see our logo or hear our ad or hear that tagline. If I said to you, just do it, we want you to think right away Nike, And it tastes great, less filling, we want you to think of Miller Lite, the original slogan that they used on their beer. And so we want, again, to inform, to persuade. We want to create that understanding, that awareness, that recognition, that level of appreciation in the mind of the consumer about our products and services. Sometimes we're putting out ads and marketing communications at a particular time and place and in a certain way to jointly support other things that we are doing. So that if we have ads for a particular vehicle, we may have ads for another vehicle. If we're doing this, we may also do that, and so on. You know, if you're Walt Disney World or the Walt Disney Company and brand, they have multiple theme parks, but at the same time they also have Disney cruises. And so at certain times a year that it's the common cruise season, families tend to go on Disney in the summer months or holiday breaks and vacations. Your one kind of ad may be in support of another, and so on. And then, of course, ultimately, always the bottom line is the action. We want that customer to cross over, click the button, make the purchase, put down the money, and to take that action about our product and service. When we're trying to build that initial step, that brand awareness, it begins with the brand image, how people perceive that brand, whether it's Bud Light or Honda or anything else. It begins with that awareness. We want the consumers to recognize the brand. And this is true, again, business to business as well as business to end consumer and purchaser of the product. And so-called modified rebuy situations, we talked a little bit about these. A company that has bought our stuff before, but now over a period of time, maybe the specifications have changed, maybe our product and service has changed, maybe their needs have changed, and so business to business on that next purchase, a year, 2, 3 years down the line, so-called modified rebuy, that business is coming to us saying, we're willing and able to buy more of your stuff, but we need X, Y, and Z, not just A, B, and C. And so that awareness, we want that company, that other business, to maintain, to establish, to have that awareness, that knowledge, that understanding, and of course that preference to continue buying from us. And so if you're a successful brand, you're going to be the top of mind, you're going to be the first one of that kind that the consumer is going to think of. You're going to be, hopefully and ideally, their top choice. And so brand equity, the perception of value to the customer, leads to that being also then top of mind and top choice. It's what you want. So when we are thinking about the different kinds of media that we're going to use, well, you want to go where your customers go. Where do your people who are your primary consumers and customers, where do they go for their information about your type of product and service? Are they looking on the web? Are they looking in certain magazines? If you're selling automobiles or automobile-related parts and services like tires, there's a good chance you're going to advertise in the leading automobile magazines, Road and Track, Car and Driver, Automobile, the 3 dominant Motor Trend, the 4 dominant American car magazines. And they all have slightly different readership profiles. So where is my target market? I want to place my ads with them, or where they're most likely to see it. And again, the audience, what are their characteristics? What do we know about those people who are looking at that stuff? Same thing with business to business. All of this really ultimately is about understanding your customers to the best of your ability. And where then can we place our ads? What media can and should we use to get the best connection, to get the best communication, to make the most impact through the message that we're trying to deliver. Taglines, we've talked about again, those key phrases, just do it, it's memorable. It means something unique or special, whatever that may be. And it's going to be consistent across all of the things that we do. So whether it's a print ad or a broadcast ad, whether it's in a newspaper or inside of a game on your phone, that message, that tagline is going to be present. It will be consistent. They have tended to be a little shorter nowadays than they were years and years ago. And so sometimes brands have to revise or come up with a new tagline. I don't see Nike changing just do it anytime soon, but other companies do, and sometimes that's important. The notion of consistent messaging in our advertising and marketing communications, that's got something also to do with how we store stuff in memory. What we're looking for is that repeated messages that we take in, move from the short-term part of our brain memory to the long-term memory. It's kind of like moving from one file cabinet to another. And that's what we're after. We want that message that we're giving to them to get embedded into the long-term memory part of the brain, so that the next time, even like we said about cars, that we don't buy that often. But when we do, we want to be able to say, oh, there's the Toyota ad that I saw before. There's the message, and I think of that. And whatever it is, we want to recall that from that long-term memory. Part of that is visual consistency becomes key. These again have to do with the ways that the brain stores and processes information. So that if we use a certain image and a certain kind of ad, it's going to be here, it's going to be there, and it will again, more likely, get embedded into that long-term memory, that file cabinet in our brain. It's what we want. And so we want that repetition again and again to enhance the recall, enhance the awareness, so that the customer, when the day comes and they need whatever it is, aha, I remember them, I know about them, they're top of mind. Yeah, I associate them with good value, good quality, good utility. I'm satisfied with that, and so I'm going to go look for that one out there in the marketplace. There's also some variability that says we can make some changes. We can put our message into different contexts and settings. We can have some variation, and if we do, we can put those varied tellings of our story into multiple media. Again, there's a trade-off and a balance, but at the heart of the matter, the core message, whether it's the slogan, whether it's the attributes, whether it's the value, those core elements have to be consistent, even if the story is told in somewhat different ways. And there are companies like Geico, for example, and Progressive Insurance, certain companies that have slight and sometimes more significant variations in the type of ads they run, in the ways that they present their product. And yet, the core elements, again, of the value and the utility and the attributes of it that they're trying to convey are consistent across those different messages. So with regard to the positioning, how we want to be perceived and seen compared to relation to the competition, we want to maintain that consistency. That however the customer thinks of us, Crest versus Colgate, Colgate versus Crest, Arm & Hammer versus both of them, Tom's that I use, compared to any of them, we want to have consistency of the positioning. That is to say, the customer, we hope, will continue to see us compared to them in the same way. And so these are so-called links in the cognitive map. Again, cognitive map in this case, how we are storing this in our brain. That this idea and this thought and this message and this image and this logo takes us from thought to thought to thought, from recall to recall, pulling these things up out of the file cabinets of our mind. And we want that consistent relationship positioning. We want to be clear. We want to not have ambiguity, which is to say less confusion in the mind of the consumer and the potential customer. How long do we keep doing all this stuff? Well, again, if the goal is to get that message into the long-term memory of the consumer, we have to be careful. We have to do some research. We have to try and find out if we can and evaluate these things, and that's what companies all do. They'll do all kinds of surveys and sample studies and focus groups and different techniques to assess the impact of the message on the mind of the consumer. And if we don't go long enough, well, it's less likely that they're going to retain it. But if we go on and on and on and on and on, people are going to tune it out. They're going to say, oh, that again, stale. And they're not going to pay attention. Today, again, we've talked a little bit about certain technologies, whether it's our ability to click off a website that we don't really want to see, click off the commercial, or at home we may use a digital video recorder, record our favorite shows, and then simply fast forward through and skip the commercials if they aren't interesting to us anyway. And so typical length for campaigns, as you'll see here, is about 6 months, but it can vary. We get finally to this notion of the creative brief. What is this advertising and marketing group, whether it's internal or external? These folks who put this plan together, they want to write it up in essence for us, to be able to present it to us. Not just the short pitch, but brief in this case in the sense of factual summary. And these are the elements of the creative brief, the report that they're going to produce for us. They're going to tell us and share with us their understanding. This is the objective. This is the target audience of customers. Here's the way we want to present the message. Here's how we're going to support that message getting out there. Constraints tend to refer to both legal and ethical limits of what we can say and what we can do. So there may be warranty issues, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a bit more. Objective, no secret, we are trying to persuade. We want you to love our stuff and to go out and buy our stuff again and again and again every time you need that kind of thing. So target audience, we see here a particular sample that's out of the text, and this is an ad that has a particular sort of integrated human endeavor here. These people carefully balancing and moving together in this acrobatic way. And so the target audience here, human resource professionals within a particular business, people whose job it is to help everybody sort of function together in this extremely harmonious and united way, as the visual suggests. So the theme of the message, well, we tend to want to be unique. We don't want to sound like everybody else. It's hard for Colgate not to sound like Crest. It's easier for Tom's to not sound like either because they have a unique history and perspective. And how can we be unique? How can we be different? If we're selling ice cream, you may be familiar with a brand that's been very hot in the marketplace in the last year or two called Halo Top. Their claim to fame is that they are much lower in calories and still great in taste compared to some of the other really better known brands. They've been extremely successful in pushing that unique perspective, that unique aspect of attribute, quality, and value. We know that our brains have so-called left and right hemispheres, left and right sides, and each side of the brain processes information and communication a little differently. So we advertise to both. We want to market and communicate to both. We want to hit that logical, rational side. We also want to hit that emotional side. Again, cognitive and affective. What we can know, the logic and rational side. The emotional side, how does it make us feel? And the more logical side, the message is much more effective if it's using much more concrete, logical stuff. Numbers, letters, words, and specific concepts. Rational appeal, as it says in the slide. The other side, that's the emotional side. Much more about the abstract or symbolic representation of meaning. We're not going to say exactly what this does, but what does just do it mean? Well, it can mean literally get up and run and exercise. It can mean something more. And that one kind of hits on both sides of the appeal. It's to the mind and the heart, the emotions and the logic and the rational side. Well, the message theme here, we see another sample ad about the future of Texas. And this again, the company trying to associate itself with a particular potential to say, if you choose us, this is something that we can do. And it plays on potential customers' knowledge of the history and the literal geographic size, as well as the symbolic size of the economy and the culture and the influence of Texas itself. And so it tries to use these things both, again, the visual image, a little more abstracted or symbolic, along with the words, the more specifically rational part of the message. Support, we see again in this one, it's showing us support, meaning who else can we claim that supports the message, the value, the perception, the affect or attributes of our particular product and service. And so we see in this particular ad that's shown from the text that this company in this ad is showing us all these awards that they won. Look how great we are because we've won all these awards. We've gotten all this recognition from all of these people and places who are presumably experts in our field, who say how great we are, and if we're great to them, we must be great for you too. So constraints, as I said a few minutes ago, this is typically about the legal and ethical limits. And so when you look at product packaging, you'll see disclaimers. Not meant to do this. Not intended for this. You see this an awful lot on dietary supplements and health type things and medications that are over the counter and so on. You know, see a doctor if you have these symptoms. Don't use this to cure that because it hasn't been tested or proven by pretty much anybody other than us. And so they have to be careful. Their lawyers, hopefully your lawyers, if you're working in-house, are going to tell you, hey, when you're going to put that ad out, there's some things you got to be aware of, some stuff you got to be concerned about. And so these things become part of the landscape as well. So that's a bit of a summary there about Chapter 5. I think we've pretty much covered it. Yeah, pretty much. And there we go. So we're good to go. And I want to thank you for taking a few minutes to sit with me and take a look at Chapter 5. I'll see you next time in class. Bye-bye.